Hello, my name's Gary and welcome to my placement presentation. You join me here in my office environment as due to the current COVID-19 pandemic I've had to work from home before being put on furlough, and John was kind enough to let me take the sit-stand desk home with me. So my placement this year has been with a company called Canary Designs, which is an ergonomics consultancy based up here in North Wales. And throughout this presentation I'll aim to give you a little bit of an overview of my placement at Canary, what I've been up to, and also a little bit about the company itself. Canary is a small ergonomics consultancy based up in North Wales, like I said before, founded by John Loughborough back in 2011. So John formed Canary for a couple of reasons. After being out in the industry for several years, since graduating from Loughborough, he's realised that in order to practice good ergonomics you have to be outside of the organisation, otherwise you'll be only part of the problem. And also a lot of these organisations didn't have the software or equipment which he needed to practice good ergonomics. So by starting Canary he was able to provide all these, get all this equipment for himself, and also offer an outside looking in approach to these organisations. Over the past 9 years, Canary has built a really diverse portfolio, working in several different industries and also doing an expert witness work for the High Courts down in London. So I'll get the presentation started now about talking about some of the activities which I've been involved in this year.
When I started my placement back in August last year, I was involved in the production of new marketing material for Canary Designs. As John was previously a one-man band before I joined him, he did not have a lot of time to focus on the marketing side of the business, as he had to focus on the fee-paying work. Having an online presence is fundamental to any business in today's society, so one of the tasks which I did was produce a wireframe for a new website. The previous Canary site was very simple and only featured text with minimal visuals used throughout, so I set myself the goal to try and modernise and make the website look more professional during the redesign. To produce the website wireframe I used Azure RP9, as I was familiar with the software from second year. During the project I applied a lot of the skills that I had picked up on during the UX module, from the layout of the pages through to the structure of the site. After producing the wireframe, it was shared with the different website developers in order to quote to build, which was a very valuable learning experience for me. Building the website has also allowed me to learn more about John's methods and techniques which he uses, as I had to go through his archive projects in order to build a company portfolio for the website. Part of the marketing material work included building the Canary Designs YouTube channel. The aim of it was to showcase some of the techniques and tools which we use, and also to raise some awareness of the subject, as it is commonly misunderstood by the general public. Creating the 3-part series on digital human modelling helped me to better understand the technique, but also to develop my skills in Jack, as I have not had much experience in using it before. Throughout the year I also worked on a range of brochures which aimed to help with the marketing for the company. Many were tailored to the specific industry, such as nuclear or search and rescue. I also ended up producing a hiring brochure which was published and distributed at the CIEHF Careers Fair back in February. Producing these brochures throughout the year has utilised a lot of the skills which I had learned from the design communication module in second year, and has been further developed as I was mentored by John. Although I've not been a large part of the journey due to being on furlough, Canary Designs is also working on an e-commerce system on the website. I did create a draft site map for this, in which I learned that the key is to get the customer to check out with the shortest possible route. A project which I learned a significant amount from was the collaboration one which Canary Designs did with the Remap charity. Remap are a nationwide charity which makes equipment to help people live more independent lives, and Canary Designs worked with the local North Wales panel for this project. I was challenged with designing a wheelchair attachment for a wheelchair user who wanted to take pictures of aircraft at air shows. I talked about this project in a lot more depth during my November placement visit, so I'll only briefly talk about the key details now. What really made this project interesting and memorable for me was that it allowed me to practice the principles of user-centered design, which I've been learning about in a practical way. I used Solidworks and Jack in order to recreate the wheelchair and the user digitally through measurements taken during the visit. This meant I was able to try out multiple different designs quickly before finalising a one to develop further. Although it was a great project on multiple different levels, I also learned a lot from it, some of which include managing client expectations and testing equipment fully before you deliver. Through this project I also learned about compromise and researching into off-the-shelf solutions in order to make your design work, as the company was working to a tight budget, as their services were only volunteered for this project and weren't being paid for. So I had to work quickly and efficiently on this project. However, for me, the golden lesson on this project was to work with the user when designing, not to be led by them, and this is a point which I will talk about more later on in this video. A project which was a landmark for me was this nuclear decommissioning project, as it was my first formal client project. Reflecting upon it now, I learned a lot through this project through John's mentoring. The project was to perform an ergonomic assessment on 3 different CAD models. It was through this project in which I understood the importance of considering stakeholders, as they all have different tasks to perform on the design. It was also when I started to learn how, although Jack is a very powerful tool, you need to use it effectively in order to get the most of it, such as simulating accurate and representative posture for the mannequins. It was also through this project which I learned how to use ISO standards in order to assess a design, a skill which I found very transferable to other projects moving forward. We also did a little bit of reverse mentoring on this project, in which I used my Solidworks knowledge in order to use colour and smart dimension in order to highlight where certain human-machine interfaces are in relation to design for the reports. This is another client which I really enjoyed working on projects for. This project looked at laying out a room in a production facility. This project allowed me to learn about designing an environment based on the workflow and requirements of the different stakeholders. I also used SolidWorks and Jack in order to experiment with different pieces of equipment and layout in the room. Once we had worked out the layout for the room, we also conducted a heart rate trial in order to understand the workload for the task for the operator, which developed my experimental skills. It was also interesting to perform a workflow calculation in order to see what resources will be needed in order to reach the production process goal. It was also through this project in which I learned how to use the HSC art tool. Again, this was another project which I went in far more detail during my placement visit back in November. A slightly different project which I had the opportunity to work on was to design and plan an exhibition stand for Canary Designs at the Health and Wellbeing Conference at the NEC back at the start of March in 2020. Based on the information provided by the organisers and the ideas which John had, I created a virtual model of how the stand will look in SolidWorks. Other graphical packages were used to produce the board and banners used for the stand. The Canary Design stand at the exhibition was slightly different, as we had focused it to be a workshop for people to participate in, which aimed to increase the audience engagement and involvement. Beyond the design and planning for the event, such as the logistics and everything behind the scenes, I found it very rewarding seeing it all come together on the day. The entire experience of attending a conference as an exhibitor was also invaluable, as I learned things such as talking to people who are walking by and how to best sell your services which you provide to people, along with thinking on your feet, as the design of the stand which we planned and based everything upon was changed only a few days before the event, so we didn't have time to change everything else, so we just had to adapt. However, I think the stand turned out looking great and that Canary had a great turnout from the event. I also worked on another nuclear decommissioning project this year. However, I was not involved from the beginning, as John did some work on the initial design around 12-18 months ago. My involvement started with attending the factory acceptance trial, known as a FAT, with John. The FAT trial is when the design has been built and is undergoing some testing before being implemented. The client invited Canary Designs to the FAT trial in order to see how the system is used and provide some human factor support where applicable. On the day of the FAT trial, me and John watched the different tasks the team had to perform and took some videos and photos throughout the day in order to have a record for when we formally review it back in the office. This was when I learned that the key to filming people performing these tasks is to capture the entire body posture and not just what they are interacting with. After gathering the data from the FAT trial, we began to analyse it in the office. John found the latest CAD model which we had access to in order to compare with what we observed during the FAT trial. In order to understand the tasks which the team performed and the postures they used, a series of screenshots from the video were taken to produce a storyboard for the process. This will also become a very useful feature when simulating the postures with target population in Jack when testing the design intent. This is a way of working which I have found to be extremely useful and one which I continue to use whenever applicable. During the analysis, an area which was investigated in more was the bagging sequence. The original design was complex and required multiple steps and 2 people to complete, as it required the bag to be trimmed and sealed by crimping before being wrapped with a mesh netting. A solution was provided to the client in the form of using industrial sealing clips, which would make the entire process simpler and more straightforward for the operators. Other findings from the analysis show that the height simulated during the FAT trial to perform this task was higher than the design intent, which means that in order for the design intent to work, some modifications in order to lift the operator higher up will be needed, otherwise they will be unable to reach the bag. Part of the solution which we provided for the client on this project was also a redesign of the SCADA control screens. Analysing the FAT trial screens showed that they were confusing and cluttered as things were tightly packed into a small screen. This was when John educated me on how problematic a poorly designed graphical user interface can be when the system is implemented from his experience. It was also through this part of the project in which I learned more about graphical user interface designs, as this is an area which John has some experience in. Some of the things which I learned include the importance of having a sequence indicator to tell the operator where they are, along with the best place to lay out certain elements such as interlocks and alarms. Another pharmaceutical project which I worked on was an optioneering study for a big bag packaging system, BBPS for short. The project is for the same facility which I did some work on earlier in the year for the Sagars, which I briefly mentioned before. Similar to the other project, we were given the option to design the room as we believe is most suitable for the tasks required to be performed by the operator, as it is still a new facility which is in the design phase. The BBPS system would be used for packing large 1-ton bags full of substance. What made this project more interesting for me personally was that it was very different from other projects which I've worked on to date, as I had to research into the different systems available on the market which was able to perform the bagging tasks required. Once I did this research, I produced 4 different CAD models of the systems. These CAD models were made in Solidworks and were not all dimensionally accurate, as many of these systems did not have any dimensional data available, as I assumed that many of them would be custom made for the client. Therefore, many of the dimensions were from photogrammetry, which is a skill that John has taught me and I have slowly developed, and dimensions of the initial system which the client provided us with, and standardized dimensions for features such as the large 1-ton bag and the pallets. Once the different BBPS systems were built, they were transferred into Jack and simulated the task sequence with the target population in which we built from the previous project, in which I talked a little bit more about during the November placement visit. However, each BBPS design was assessed whether they allowed the target population to perform a step in the task sequence. This task sequence was kept generic, featuring steps such as align bag or seal bag. By keeping these generic common tasks with all these systems, it allowed the task sequence to become the criteria for the optioneering study. It was also through this project in which I learned several key practices, one of which is to evaluate systems out of context first, as you may miss details once you have the system in its context when assessing. I learned that this is a method which can be used to generate user requirements for the system. An example being you may need access to certain elements of the system to perform a task, but it may be restricted once you put it into context. I feel that this optioneering workflow which me and John used for this project is very similar to that of creating a prototype in the design process. By producing a relatively simple CAD model of the system in SolidWorks and transferring it into Jack, it quickly allows us to see whether it is suitable or not, and foresee what problems we may have with the system before progressing any further.